The smell of rotting meat hit the ballroom before the silver lid was even fully lifted. They put dog food on the queen's plate. The entire court waited for the Runt to cry. They waited for her to run. She didn't. She picked up the raw bone, looked her sister dead in the eye, and took a bite. Then came the snap that haunted the king forever. Chapter 1. The silver screamed. To the high court shifters, the sound was nothing. A mistake. Just a fork scraping against fine china. But to Bree, the vibration rattled her teeth like a warning shot. The fork was too small. The crystal glasses were too thin. Even the air in the banquet hall felt scarce, refusing to fill her lungs, no matter how hard she pulled it in. 100 eyes bore into her skin. The council, the nobles, they weren't eating. They were waiting. They wanted the Runt to spill her wine. They wanted the girl from the gutters to prove she didn't belong next to their alpha king. Black silk wrapped tight around her ribs, squeezing. Beautiful, yes, the color of midnight. But it hid her muscles. It hid the scars that proved she knew how to survive. Don't snap. She focused on the plate. A single green piece sat in the center, glazed and slippery. It looked ridiculous. She tried to spear it. The fork slipped. Clink. Conversation died. Heat didn't flush her cheeks. It burned the back of her neck. Anger. Pure, molten anger. She had fought for scraps in alleyways. She had outrun hunters with silver bullets in their chambers. Was this it? Was a tiny green vegetable going to defeat her? She looked up. Across the table, Titus watched her. He ignored the pea. He ignored the fork. He looked straight into her soul. To the court, his face was stone. To Bree, the tiny twitch in his jaw spoke volumes. He was angry too. Not at her, for her. He gave a microscopic nod. Breathe. But the doubt had claws. He was the king, born for silk and silver. She was born for dirt and blood. Her thumb pressed down on the utensil. She didn't mean to do it. She just needed to feel something solid. She needed to know she could still break things. The metal gave way. It didn't snap. It folded. The neck of the expensive silver fork curled backward like a dying flower. Bree froze. Panic hit her chest like a hammer. She had just destroyed royal property. If the council saw this, they wouldn't just laugh. They would feast. They would call her a brute, an animal in a dress. Her hand moved faster than thought. She slid the twisted metal under a large lettuce leaf. Evidence buried. Thump, 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 thump. Her heart was the loudest thing in the universe. A waiter stepped forward. He smelled of starch and terror. He leaned in with a crystal pitcher to refill her water. Then he stopped. His gaze dropped to the plate. He saw the silver tip of the mangled fork poking out from the green. His eyes widened. He looked at the metal. Then he looked at Bree's neck. He looked at the thick muscle corded there, the raw power hiding under the diamonds. He swallowed. The water pitcher trembled in his grip. He didn't pour. He backed away. He ran. Bree exhaled, placing her hands in her lap to hide the tremors. Under the tablecloth, her fingers curled into fists. They thought she was weak because she was quiet. They thought she was a runt because she didn't bark. They were wrong. The heavy doors at the far end of the hall groaned open. The music cut out. Something was coming. Instinct spiked in her blood. The fine hairs on her arms stood up. This wasn't fear. This was the recognition of arrival. The smell hit her first. Sickly sweet. Flowers left in a vase too long. Rotting water. Bree didn't turn around. She knew that stench. It was the scent of her childhood. The scent of the sister who had kicked her when she was down. A low growl vibrated in her throat, silent and waiting. She wasn't the runt anymore. And if they wanted a show, she might just give them a massacre.
Murder. It was a simple thought. Calm, rational. Titus looked around the banquet hall. To the guests, this was a party. Gold, food, music. To Titus, it was a nest of vipers waiting to strike. And every single pair of eyes was fixed on her. Bree. The moment their gazes locked, his inner wolf settled. She looked trapped, shoulders hunched. He hated that dress. Not because she wasn't a vision of the night itself, but because he knew the silk felt like a net against her skin. He watched the frustration tighten her mouth. Let them look, let them judge. These soft, pampered council members saw a runt. They saw a gutter rat who didn't know which spoon to use for the soup. Titus saw a survivor. He saw the woman who had taken a bullet for him. He saw the wolf who could tear out a throat faster than he could blink. He watched her hand tighten on the silverware. Show them. Then he saw it, the subtle twist of her wrist, the way the silver bent like wet clay in her fingers. Dark satisfaction uncoiled in his gut. He almost smiled. It would have been a terrifying expression, the kind that made his generals sweat. She was stronger than any of them knew. His own hand rested on the table, fingers brushing the stem of his wine glass. The crystal was thin, weak. If he squeezed, it would shatter into 1,000 bloody diamonds. He wanted to. He wanted to roar until the windows blew out and remind these people who their king was. But Bree had asked for time. She wanted to fight her own battles. So he waited. He kept his face blank, but his senses were wide open. He could hear the heartbeat of the council leader, slow, arrogant, the whisper of the servants, fast, scared. Then the air changed. A new scent rolled over the smell of roasted meat. Heavy, perfume. Roses, but not fresh roses. Chemical, fake. A growl vibrated in Titus's chest, too deep for human ears. But the shifters at the table went rigid. They felt the rumble in the wood. Temperature in the hall plummeted. Titus didn't look in the door. He looked at Bree. Her spine straightened. Her pupils dilated, swallowing the gold of her irises. She wasn't scared. She was ready. The double doors swung wide. Sasha. Titus narrowed his eyes. She walked like she owned the stones beneath her feet. Red. She wore bright, screaming red. A challenge, a declaration of war in a room of black and gold. She carried a scroll tied with a velvet ribbon. Disrespect radiated off her in waves. Sasha didn't bow. She didn't kneel. She didn't even look at him. She looked past him, past Bree. She beamed at the high council members, smiling a smile that didn't reach her eyes. This wasn't a visit. It was a performance. Sasha walked forward, the velvet ribbon trailing on the floor behind her like a snake in the dust. The air thickened. Silence shifted from awkward to dangerous. The table creaked under Titus's hand. Wood began to fracture. He forced his fingers to uncurl. He placed his palm flat. Stillness was his only option. If he moved now, he would rip Sasha's head off before she could speak. And that would make Bree look weak, like she needed him to save her. He leaned back, crossing his arms. His eyes glowed. Amber fire in the dim light. He smelled the excitement rolling off Sasha. She thought she was winning. She thought she was the predator. You have no idea. You just walked into the den of a monster. Sasha finally turned her head. She looked at Bree. She smiled. It was the ugliest thing Titus had ever seen.
That smile was a knife. Sasha stood there, wrapped in red silk that cost more than Bree's entire childhood home, pressing the blade of her grin against Bree's throat. Nausea twisted Bree's stomach. Not fear. Never fear. It was the sickness of smelling something sweet covering up something rotten. Sasha took a step. Click, click, click. The heels were sharp on the marble. Your Majesty, Sasha purred. Her voice was light, airy like wind chimes, but underneath, the hiss of a snake in tall grass. Sister. A waiter appeared at Sasha's side. He wasn't palace staff. His uniform hung loose. His eyes darted, nervous. He held a large silver platter covered by a heavy dome. Bree's nose twitched. Whatever was under that dome didn't smell like pheasant or truffle. It smelled cold. "I bring a peace offering," Sasha announced, pitching her voice so the council wouldn't miss a syllable. "A gift from home, to remind the new queen of her humble roots." The council members leaned in. Like vultures, they smelled blood. They wanted to see the runt put back in her place. Bree didn't blink. She kept her hands folded, hiding the tremors of rage threatening to shake her bones. Sasha wasn't giving a gift. She was setting a trap. But the smell was getting stronger. It cut through the wine, old grease, wet fur, the bottom of a dumpster behind a butcher shop. Hunger. Memories slammed into Bree. Cold nights, fighting over gristle, the gnawing ache in her belly that never went away. Sasha knew. Sasha had watched from the warm window while Bree dug through the trash. Her heart skipped, not from shame, but adrenaline. Her wolf woke up. It didn't like the smell of the past. It wanted to bite. "Open it." Bree's voice was low. Gravel. Not a queen, but a warning. Sasha's smile widened, delighted. She reached out a manicured hand, red nails looking like fresh blood against the silver handle. Beside her, Titus shifted. Heat radiated off him like a furnace. He was seconds away. From flipping the table, Bree moved her hand under the cloth. She found his knee, squeezed, hard. "No, this is mine." The air in the room turned solid, hard to breathe. Sasha's fingers curled around the handle. "For you, sister," Sasha whispered. "Bon appetit." Time stalled. The room held its breath. Bree braced herself. She didn't know exactly what was on that plate, but she knew that whatever it was about to change everything.
Air left the room. Titus didn't need oxygen. He needed violence. The woman in red lifted the silver dome. Squelch. The wet sound of suction as the lid pulled away from the platter. A gasp rippled through the room. Ladies in the front row recoiled. Council members stiffened. Titus looked down. His vision went red at the edges. It wasn't food, it was garbage. Sitting on the priceless china was a pile of gray, congealed scraps. A hunk of raw fat, yellow and sweating in the heat, strips of gristle even a starving dog would leave behind. And in the middle of the filth, a bone. Massive. A cow's femur, raw, broken, stripped of meat but heavy with marrow. The kind of thing you threw to a wild animal to keep it quiet. The stench hit them, rot and iron, the smell of the slaughterhouse floor. A fly, fat and black, buzzed out from under the dome. It landed on the raw fat, rubbing its legs together in the dead silence. Bzzzt. The sound was a scream in Titus's ears. His body reacted before his mind could catch up. The wolf took over. Claws punched through the tips of his leather gloves. Canines lengthened, slicing his lip. The copper taste of his own blood filled his mouth. They dared? They dared to serve this to his queen? To his mate? It wasn't an insult. It was a suicide note. He waited for Bree to cry. He waited for her to scream, to bury her face in her hands and run. That's what they wanted. To break her. He planted his feet. He was going to launch himself across the table. He was going to rip Sasha's throat out in front of the entire court. Treaties be damned. Fire bloomed beneath her skin. Bree moved. He expected her to shrink away. Instead, she leaned in. Titus froze. The muscles in his neck felt like steel cables snapping tight. Bree wasn't crying. Her face was blank, empty, but her eyes were locked on that raw bone. She didn't pick up the silver fork. She didn't pick up the crystal goblet. She reached out with her bare hand. Titus looked at Sasha. The antagonist's smile faltered. She'd expected tears. She hadn't expected the queen to reach for the garbage. Whispers hissed through the room. Look at her. She knows it's her food. A savage. Once a runt, always a runt. Titus heard every word. He filed the voices away. He would hunt them later, every single one. Bree's fingers touched the cold, greasy bone. And then, the terrifying truth hit him. Bree wasn't offended. She was hungry. Not for the meat, for the power. She gripped the heavy bone. Her knuckles didn't turn white. They looked strong. Deadly. Titus slowly retracted his claws. He forced his breath to even out. He watched his mate, his queen, pick up the instrument of her humiliation. She didn't look like a victim. She looked like a predator who had just been served dinner. Bree lifted the bone to her nose. She inhaled, deeply. She looked at Sasha. A shiver of pure, dark pride raced down Titus's spine. Sasha thought she had brought a weapon to hurt Bree. She had just handed her the murder weapon.
The grease was cold. It coated her fingertips, thick and slick. To the nobles watching, it was filth. It was a reminder of the gutter she crawled out of. But to Bree, the layer of animal fat felt like armor. She didn't wipe her hand. She let the silence stretch until it became painful, letting the grease settle into her pores. She lifted the heavy bone higher. Instinct took the wheel. She brought the raw femur to her face. Closing her eyes to shut out the gold and the judgment, she inhaled. The scent of the marrow trapped deep inside the calcium cage hit her hard. It smelled like iron. It smelled like life. A gasp snagged in the quiet air. The Duchess on her left looked ready to faint. Good. Sasha had chosen this specific insult with surgical precision. She thought she was reminding Bree of her weakness. She thought Bree would see the bone and remember being small, cold, and hungry. She was wrong. Bree remembered surviving. She remembered that while these soft lords and ladies were eating cakes, she was learning how to crack a bone with her teeth to get to the prize inside. She opened her eyes. Sasha flinched. Just a tiny bit. A twitch of the eyelid. Bree didn't smile. Wolves didn't smile before they ate. She turned the bone in her hand. It was heavy, dense, a weapon disguised as waste. "You are right, sister." Her voice was calm, too calm, flat and hard like the stone floor of a cave. "The food here is lacking." Confusion rippled across Sasha's face. She had expected a tantrum. She had expected tears. She didn't know what to do with a queen who looked at garbage like it was gold. Bree took it a step further. She didn't put the bone down. She didn't call for a napkin. She lowered the bone, hovering it over her own plate, gripping it like a scepter. The message was clear. She wasn't rejecting the insult. She was claiming it. Heart skipping, she realized the power shift. The room wasn't looking at Sasha anymore. They were looking at her. They were terrified. They were waiting to see what the wild animal would do next. In the span of a breath, Bree decided. She wouldn't just hold it. She would use it. She ran her thumb along the jagged edge where the bone had been broken. It was sharp. Sharp enough to cut skin. Dark primal delight spun through her blood. She leaned forward, invading Sasha's personal space from across the table. "But you forgot something." Bree tapped the greasy bone against the rim of her crystal wine glass. Clink. "You forgot the salt."
Titus felt a crack in his composure. It wasn't anger anymore. It was something darker, something hotter. The bond pulsed between them, slamming Bree's emotions into his chest in waves. There was no fear. There was only cold, calculated dominance. He stared at her. She held the raw bone like it was a royal orb. Grease smeared her fingers. It should have been disgusting. It should have been humiliating. Yet Titus had never wanted her more. Queen. The word hung in his mind, loud and absolute. She was a true queen, not of silk and laws, but of blood and bone. A sharp tearing sound ripped through the quiet near his hands. He looked down. His body had moved on instinct. Under the table, his fist had clenched around the heavy linen napkin on his lap. He had shredded it. The thick fabric hung in tatters between his fingers. He was seconds away from losing control. He wanted to clear the room. He wanted to drag Bree out of this suffocating hall and take her back to the den. He wanted to lick the grease from her fingers and show her exactly what a predator did with a prize. But then he saw the council members. They were pale. They were sweating. Bree didn't need him to save her. She was hunting. The High Counselor, a fat man named Lord Vane, stared at the bone in Bree's hand. Vane's throat bobbed. He was terrified. He was realizing that the girl they called a runt was holding a bludgeon at a dinner party. It was a masterclass in fear. Bree didn't scream. She just sat there, holding the evidence of their cruelty, and dared them to say a word. Titus shifted his gaze to Sasha. The sister looked small now. The red dress didn't look powerful. It looked desperate. She shifted her weight, looking at Titus, silently begging him to intervene, to stop the madness, to tell Bree to put the bone down. Instead, Titus leaned back in his chair. He picked up his wine glass, taking a slow, deliberate sip. The space between him and Sasha burned. You started this. His eyes promised. Now you have to survive it. The atmosphere shifted from awkward to lethal. Bree wasn't done. Titus could feel the static electricity dancing over her skin. She adjusted her grip on the bone. She shifted her fingers, finding the fulcrum point, the weak spot in the calcium structure. Her soul answered the call of the wild, and his soul answered hers. Her bicep tensed. Just a slight ripple of muscle under the midnight silk. She was going to break it. He almost warned them. Run, he wanted to say. Run before she snaps. But he stayed silent. He wanted to hear the sound. He wanted to hear the snap that would break the spine of the court's arrogance. Anticipation built with every heartbeat. Bree's eyes hardened. She was about to show them exactly how strong a runt could be.
The bone was cold, but her blood was boiling hot. She held the femur in her right hand, thick, dense. A cow's leg bone was designed to hold up 1,000 pounds of beast. It wasn't meant to be broken, not by human hands. But Bree wasn't human. The weight of the council's stares pressed down on her. They were waiting for her to put it down, to cry, to run. Instead, she tightened her grip. The ridges of the bone bit into her palm. Grounding pain. It reminded her of the winter she spent shivering, wishing she had a coat. It reminded her of the hunger that used to carve her insides hollow. Sasha laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound. Oh, look, the little wolf doesn't know what to do with her toy. Should we fetch a dog to help her? Bree didn't look at the bone. She looked up. She locked eyes with her sister. With a single glance, she poured every ounce of her dominance into the space between them. She didn't growl. She didn't bare her teeth. She just pushed. The atmosphere in the room snapped. Bree didn't use two hands. She didn't brace the bone against the table. She simply squeezed. She channeled the wolf, the strength that lived in her marrow, the power of the runt that had survived the impossible. Crack. It started as a fracture, a dry popping sound inside the calcified shaft. Sasha's smile died. She heard it. Bree twisted her wrist. Just a fraction. Crack. The sound was like a gunshot in a library. Loud, wet, violent. The thick femur snapped cleanly in two. The sound echoed off the crystal chandeliers. Splinters of bone flew onto the white tablecloth. Drops of marrow, thick and dark, splattered onto the pristine silver platter. Nobody breathed. The music died. The servants froze. Bree held the two jagged pieces of bone in one hand, clicking them together. Click, click. She wasn't done. She brought the jagged, broken end of the bone to her lips. Sasha took a step back, face draining of color. She looked at the sharp, splintered edge. She realized for the first time that it looked exactly like a steak. Bree whispered, her voice carrying through the dead silence. The marrow is the best part, Sasha. You just have to be strong enough to get to it. The council stared. They weren't looking at a weak girl anymore. They were looking at something that could snap their necks just as easily as she had snapped that bone.
Titus had an erection. It was inappropriate. It was dangerous. It was primal. He sat motionless, hand resting flat on the table. But every muscle in his body was pulled tight as a bowstring. He had watched the snap. He had heard the wet crunch of the bone giving way under Bree's grip. A wave of scent hit him like a physical blow. Marrow, raw, exposed marrow, and beneath it, fear. The scent of the council changed. A moment ago, they smelled like arrogance and expensive perfume. Now, they smelled like sweat. They smelled like prey. Titus fought the urge to laugh. He looked at Lord Vane. The man was staring at Bree's hand, at the jagged shard of bone, like it was a loaded gun. Vane was trembling. The entire table was trembling. Meanwhile, Bree was calm. She was eating the marrow. She was digging it out with her thumb, savoring it, staring Sasha down while she did it. It was grotesque. It was savage. It was the most beautiful thing Titus had ever seen. She had tilted their world and turned the banquet hall into a jungle. But then, the captain of the royal guard stepped forward. The guard was young, stupid. He saw the queen holding a sharp object. He saw the aggression. He rested his hand on the hilt of his sword, taking a step toward the table. Titus moved. He didn't stand up. He didn't shout. A low, subsonic growl ripped from his chest. It vibrated the silverware on the table. The crystal glasses shook. The guard froze. Titus pushed his aura out. A heavy, suffocating weight. "Don't you dare," the silence screamed. "She is feeding." The guard took his hand off his sword and backed away, eyes wide, bowing his head in submission. Titus turned his gaze back to Bree. She hadn't even looked at the guard. She knew Titus had handled it. She trusted him to hold the perimeter while she made her kill. Titus picked up his own fork. He looked at the fancy, tiny portion of pheasant on his plate. He looked at Bree, who was licking grease from her thumb. He did the only thing that made sense. He picked up his plate. He looked at the waiter. And he dropped the plate onto the floor. The china shattered into 1,000 pieces. "I'll have what she's having." His voice was deep, rumbling with amusement. Bree looked at him. She smirked. There was grease on her chin. Her eyes were glowing gold. They were two wolves in a room full of sheep. And the sheep had just realized the gate was locked.
The marrow was rich. It coated her tongue, thick and savory. It tasted like survival. The silence stretched into a suffocating blanket. Bree didn't rush. She dug her thumb into the hollow of the broken bone again. She pulled out another dollop of the gray fatty jelly. She put it in her mouth. She chewed slowly. Squish. Chew. Swallow. The sound was obscene in the quiet room. The council was too terrified to look away. They watched the runt eat like a wolf at a kill. They watched the grease shine on her lips. They watched the mask of the civilized queen fall away, piece by piece. Sasha looked like she was going to be sick. Her hand fluttered to her throat, touching her pearls. You are disgusting," she hissed. "Look at you. You're ruining the dinner." Bree paused. She looked at her hand. It was slick with animal fat. Shiny, wet. Then she looked down at her dress. The midnight blue silk. It was worth more than the village she grew up in. It was a symbol of the cage they had put her in. They wanted her wrapped in expensive fabric so she couldn't move, so she couldn't fight. She didn't ask for a napkin. She didn't reach for the finger bowl. She placed her greasy hand flat against her thigh. Right on the silk. A collective gasp tore through the room. It was louder than the bone snapping. Bree pressed down. She dragged her finger slowly down her leg. Thick, dark streaks of grease stained the pristine fabric. The oil soaked into the fibers instantly, turning the blue into a deep, wet black. She was destroying the gown. She was desecrating the symbol of her crown. She felt lighter. She felt the cage bars break. She looked up at Sasha. She kept her hand on her thigh, fingers spread wide, branding the dress with her nature. "I'm not ruining the dinner, sister." Her voice was dark smoke. "I'm just getting comfortable." She stood up. The chair scraped back. The grease stain on her dress caught the light. It looked like a scar. It looked like a badge of honor. Her heart skipped, not from fear, but from the thrill of the cliff she had just jumped off. There was no going back now. She couldn't be the polite queen after this. She had marked herself, so she owned it. She walked around the table, slowly, stalking. The scent of her pheromones flooded the space. Dominance, musk, and the sharp tang of the bone she still held in her other hand. She stopped behind Sasha's chair. Sasha's world was about to collapse. Bree leaned down. She whispered into the shell of her sister's ear, close enough that her breath fogged Sasha's diamond earrings. "Do you know what we do with leftovers in the wilds, Sasha?" Bree rested her greasy hand on Sasha's bare shoulder. Sasha flinched violently, but she didn't move away. She was paralyzed by the predator standing in her blind spot. Bree left a perfect 5-fingered grease print on Sasha's skin. "We play with them."
Titus watched the stain spread. It was dark, permanent. The council members looked away in horror. They saw a queen destroying her finery. They saw madness. Titus saw liberation. He knew how much Bree hated that dress. He knew how the corset dug into her ribs. Seeing her smear the animal fat across the silk, it was the most erotic thing he had ever witnessed. She was rejecting their rules. She was rejecting their money. She circled the table toward Sasha like dark water. The guards were nervous. Their hands hovered over their weapons. They saw a woman with a sharp bone walking toward a noble. Titus didn't move his head. His voice cut through the air like a whip. "Stand down." It was barely a whisper. But the guards froze. They knew that tone. It was the tone of the alpha protecting his mate's kill. Nobody stopped her. He watched Bree place her hand on Sasha's shoulder. He saw the grease transfer from the queen to the sister. It was a brand. "You are mine," the mark said. "I can touch you. I can dirty you. I can break you." Titus stood up. He unfolded his massive frame slowly, casting a long shadow over the table. He could feel Bree's adrenaline through the bond, but his own chest was swelling with pride. He looked at the council. They were staring at the grease print on Sasha's shoulder. They looked like they were watching an execution. In fact, they were. It was the execution of Sasha's social standing. Titus decided to drive the nail into the coffin. He looked at his own clothes, the velvet jacket, the royal crest. He wanted to join her. He wanted to show them that the king stood in the mud with his queen. He picked up the wine bottle, a vintage red, older than the oldest man at the table. He tilted the bottle. Glug, glug, glug. He didn't pour it into a glass. He poured it onto the white tablecloth. The red liquid spread like blood. It soaked into the linen, creeping toward the edges, staining everything it touched. It dripped onto the floor. It splashed onto his boots. The message was sent. "We are not your dolls. We are the storm." Bree looked back at him. She saw the wine. She saw the ruin he was making in solidarity. Her eyes softened, just for a fraction of a second. Then she turned back to Sasha. Danger in the room spiked. Bree raised the sharp, broken bone again. As the mark tingled on Sasha's shoulder, Bree smiled. A real smile, a wolf's smile. "Now," Bree said to the trembling woman, "let's see what you're made of."
The fear smelled acrid. It was sharp, like vinegar burning the back of her nose. It was different from the grease or the wine. It rolled off Sasha in waves. Bree leaned closer. She could see the pulse jumping in Sasha's throat. Thump, thump, thump. A rabbit caught in the open. Bree still held the shard of the broken femur in her right hand. The jagged end pointed down, dangerously close to Sasha's neck. She didn't stab. She wasn't a murderer. She was a teacher, and class was in session. She lifted the bone shard. She let the sharp white edge hover just above Sasha's pearl necklace. Bree saw the plea in Sasha's eyes. "Please, stop." Bree smiled. "You invited the wolf to dinner, Sasha," she whispered. "Did you think I would only eat from the plate?" Bree lowered the bone. Scritch. The sound was tiny, but it cut through the room. The jagged edge of the cow bone caught the string of the pearl necklace. The tension in the room snapped tight. Bree applied pressure, just a little. Her chest ached with the memory of every insult Sasha had ever thrown at her. Runt, beggar, stray. She pushed harder. Pop! The string gave way. What followed was the sound of rain. Dozens of priceless white pearls cascaded off Sasha's neck. They hit the marble floor. Click, clack, click, clack. They rolled under the chairs. They bounced off the king's boots. Sasha gasped, hands flying to her bare neck. Bree didn't back away. She watched the pearls roll away, just like Sasha's dignity. Oops. Her voice was devoid of apology. Her world tilted toward absolute dominance. She stood in a ruined dress, hands covered in grease, holding a shiv made of bone, surrounded by scattered pearls. She had never looked more like a queen. Bree leaned in one last time. She brought the bone tip to Sasha's chin, forcing her sister to look up. "I'm still hungry," Bree murmured. "Run."
Titus watched the pearls fall. It was like slow motion. The white spheres bouncing on the dark stone. The wind shifted. He smelled the change in the room. The council wasn't judging Bree anymore. They were terrified of her. They were looking at the pearls scattering across the floor and wondering if their heads would be next. Deep, rumbling satisfaction settled in his chest. He looked at Lord Vane, the High Counselor. The fat man was sweating so much his collar was wet. Vane opened his mouth to protest. Titus turned his head. He didn't growl. He didn't shout. He fixed Vane with a look of pure, unadulterated warning. His eyes flared brighter, gold consuming the brown. "Say a word, and I will feed you to her." Vane's mouth snapped shut with an audible click. Meanwhile, Sasha was scrambling. Instinct took over, the instinct of prey. She pushed her chair back. It screeched against the floor. She stumbled, heels slipping on the pearls she had just lost. She fell. Sasha, the perfect courtier, landed hard on her knees in the middle of the spilled pearls and the spilled wine. Her red dress soaked up the mess. Nobody moved to help her. Not the guards. Not the council. Not the servants. They were all looking at Bree. Her soul answered the call of the alpha female. Bree stood over her fallen sister, bone shard still in hand. She didn't strike. She didn't need to. Seeing Sasha on her knees in the dirt was the kill. Titus saw the shift in Bree. Her shoulders dropped. The manic energy of the attack began to fade, replaced by a cold, regal certainty. The bond pulsed. Titus felt her exhaustion, but he also felt her triumph. Bree dropped the bone. Clatter. It hit the table, bouncing once before settling next to the ruined silver platter. The game was done. Titus stood fully. He walked around the table, heavy boots crunching on the pearls. He didn't look at Sasha, who was sobbing silently on the floor. He went to Bree. He reached out and took her greasy, dirty hand in his. He didn't care about the mess. He interlaced his fingers with hers, smearing the fat onto his own skin. He raised her hand to his lips. He kissed her knuckles, right over the grease. "Dinner is over." His voice was final, a decree from the gods. Whatever followed didn't matter. They had won. But as they turned to leave, a sound came from the back of the room. A slow, singular clap. Clap, clap, clap. Titus froze. Bree stiffened. They turned back toward the sound. It wasn't Sasha. It wasn't Vane. Standing in the shadows of the doorway, watching them with eyes that looked a little too much like a wolf's, was someone who shouldn't have been there. Her heart skipped a beat against his hand. The old king, Titus's father, the one everyone thought was dead. "Well done," the old man rasped. "I see you finally found a bitch with teeth."
The air in the room turned to ice. The silence roared through the hall, heavier than before. Bree stared at the man in the shadows. He shouldn't be there. He shouldn't be alive. King Lucius, the tyrant, the man who had built the hierarchy that kept runts like her in the mud. He looked like a corpse that had forgotten to lie down. Skin gray, clinging tight to his skull. Eyes milky, but holding a sharp, vicious intelligence. Her heart pounded against her ribs like a trapped bird. This was the true predator. Sasha was just a noisy puppy compared to this monster. "A bitch with teeth," Lucius repeated, stepping fully into the light. He smelled of mothballs and dry earth. "Finally. My son has stopped playing with dolls." The shock wore off. Bree felt Titus stiffen beside her. She felt the rage radiating off him, heat hot enough to burn. He was going to attack. He was going to kill his father again. Bree squeezed his hand. "Number. Not like this." She stepped forward. She was covered in grease. Her dress was ruined. She held the scent of violence on her skin. She didn't look like a courtier. She looked like a warrior. She answered the ghost. "I am not a bitch." Her voice didn't waver. It was low, vibrating with the growl she had been holding back all night. She raised her chin, exposing her throat, not in submission, but in defiance. The council members gasped. "You didn't speak to Lucius like that. Not if you wanted to keep your tongue." "And you," Bree continued, taking a step toward the dead king, "are interrupting my dinner." Lucius stopped smiling. He looked at the grease on her hands. He looked at the broken pearls on the floor. He looked at Sasha, weeping in the dirt. He looked for fear in Bree's eyes. Instead, he found a mirror. His lip curled. He lifted a hand, finger pointed like a skeletal claw. "You think breaking a bone makes you a queen, girl? You are nothing but a—" Bree cut him off. She didn't shout. She laughed. It was a dark, dry sound. "I am the one, holding the bone, old man," she whispered, lifting her greasy hand to show him the strength in her fingers. "And the pack follows the one who feeds." Her soul answered the challenge. She wasn't asking for his approval. She was telling him he was obsolete.
Titus felt his world fracturing. His father was dead. He had buried him. Yet here he stood, a rotting monument to the cruelty of the past, trying to shrink Bree back into a runt. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of his father's decay. Titus made a choice. He wasn't the prince anymore. He wasn't the son. He was the alpha. Titus wouldn't hide behind her. Not now. The bond between him and Bree pulsed stronger. It was a war drum. "She is yours," the wolf roared. "Protect her. Claim her. Leave." Titus moved. He didn't attack his father. He did something worse. He ignored him. He turned his back on Lucius. The silence was so profound, it felt like the room had been depressurized. To turn your back on an alpha was the ultimate insult. It meant they weren't a threat. It meant they didn't exist. Titus wrapped his arm around Bree's waist. His hand covered the grease stain on her hip, claiming the ruin, claiming the woman. "We are leaving." He didn't speak to his father. He spoke to the room. The guard stepped aside. They parted like the Red Sea. They looked at Lucius, then they looked at Titus. The glowing eyes, the sheer size, the lethal calm. They chose the living alpha. Titus stopped near the door. He looked back over his shoulder, not at his father, but at the table, at the mess they had made. Titus grabbed the heavy handle of the banquet hall door. "Clean this up." Then he looked at his father one last time. "And bury the dead. They smell." He pushed the doors open. Bree. The name hung in the air. She walked out beside him, head high, covered in filth and glory. Titus knew the war wasn't over. His father was back. The council was terrified. But as the cool night air hit his face, he realized it didn't matter. He looked down at Bree. She was trembling now. The adrenaline was crashing. He scooped her up into his arms. She gasped, grabbing his shoulders, smearing grease on his velvet jacket. "You did good, Runt," he whispered against her hair. She buried her face in his neck and inhaled the scent of safety. The palace doors slammed shut, shutting out the monsters. Titus carried his queen into the night. They had won the feast. Now, they had to survive the famine.
The water was hot, scalding. It steamed in the giant porcelain tub, smelling of lavender and expensive soap. Bree stared at her hands. The grease was still there. It had turned cold and sticky, gray streaks against her pale skin. It was under her fingernails. It smelled like the banquet hall. It smelled like war. She sat on the edge of the tub, still in her ruined dress. The adrenaline was gone. Now there was just shaking. Her hands trembled. Her knees knocked together. She had snapped a bone in front of the king. She had threatened her sister. She had laughed at a dead man. Maybe it was fate that she hadn't been killed on the spot. Or maybe she really was a monster. Titus knelt in front of her. He didn't care about the water. He didn't care about the mess. He dipped a soft cloth into the steaming water. Her breath caught as he took her hand. His grip was gentle, so gentle, the hands of a killer holding a baby bird. He started to wipe the grease away. The only sound was the splash of water and the rough slide of the cloth against her skin. He didn't rush. He cleaned each finger one by one. He scrubbed the runt off her, revealing the queen underneath. The tears finally came, just hot tracks running down her face. "I ruined the dress." Her voice sounded small in the echoey bathroom. Titus didn't look up. He moved to her other hand, scrubbing the fat from her palm. "You redefined the dress." His voice was a low rumble, vibrating against her knees. Her chest ached with a sudden, overwhelming love. He wasn't mad. He wasn't embarrassed. Titus dropped the cloth. He placed his wet, warm hands on her cheeks. He forced her to look at him. His eyes were burning gold. There was no judgment in them, only hunger and pride. "You were terrifying," he said softly. Bree sniffed. "Is that a compliment?" He smirked. "For a wolf, it is the highest compliment." Her soul answered him. She leaned into his touch. The fear of Lucius, the hatred of Sasha, it all faded. She let him. Stripped the ruined silk from her body. It fell to the floor in a heavy sodden heap. Fire bloomed beneath her skin. She stepped into the water. She washed away the court. She washed away the expectations. She wasn't the runt anymore. She was the one who snapped the bone.
Titus watched her sleep. Shadows danced between them. Moonlight cut across the bed. Bree lay tangled in the sheets, hair damp, breathing slow and deep. She looked peaceful. She looked soft. Yet Titus knew better. He looked at her hand, resting on the pillow near his face. He saw the strength in those fingers. He saw the way her muscles twitched, even in sleep, ready to fight. His mind drifted back to the banquet hall, to his father. Lucius was back. The old king. The ghost. Lucius had seen Bree's power. He knew she wasn't just a political pawn. He knew she was a threat. Titus felt a growl building in his chest. He pushed it down. He wouldn't wake her. Not tonight. Tonight was for victory. Tomorrow was for war. He reached out. He traced the line of her jaw with his thumb. "Bree." She shifted. Her eyes fluttered open, hazy with sleep, but sharpening the moment they found him. "You're staring." Her voice was raspy. "I'm guarding." She smiled. She reached out and placed her hand over his heart. You don't have to guard me, Titus. I have teeth. Her world tilted, and she pulled him down. He kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It was desperate. It was a claim. He tasted the lingering scent of lavender and the wild, underlying scent of wolf. Titus realized something. He used to worry about protecting her from the court. He used to worry that the sharks would eat her alive. But then, he remembered the sound of the bone snapping. Crack. He pulled back, resting his forehead against hers. He laughed, a low, dark sound in the night. What? Bree asked, breathless. I was just thinking about the council. They wanted a queen who would sit still and look pretty. The silence roared with the promise of the battles to come. Titus kissed her again. Instead, they got us. She pulled him closer, the runt and the alpha, ready to eat the world alive. Eventually the sun would rise. The old king would come for them. The war would start. But tonight, the predators were full.